world of physical media, specifically horror physical media, there are a lot of mediocre to just bad physical media releases. Now, in actuality, a lot of these, they come and they go. Releases come out, sometimes they're subpar, and people seemingly move on. Every now and again, there'll be re-releases of titles, and they'll improve on these sorts of things. But in the past, sometimes there can be releases that are iconic for all the wrong reasons. Now, the movie we're going to talk about today is one of my all-time favorite movies. We're talking about Tom Savini's directorial debut for the movie Night of the Living Dead in 1990. Yes, a movie that was remade back in a time where remakes were not really a thing that you would think would be a good thing to do, especially when you take one of the most iconic films ever made, Night of the Living Dead. Now, you watching this, you probably agree with me that Night of the Living Dead 1990 is awesome. Some people even think it's better than the original. I used to think that. I don't necessarily think that, but I also don't argue with people about it one way or the other. I love Night of the Living Dead 1990. Now, when you think about physical media releases for the film, one of the things that always come to mind for me is the iconic DVD release for Night of the Living Dead 1990. Now, I don't know about you, but I've always enjoyed that DVD artwork. I remember going to FYE around 2010. I was just looking to own Night of the Living Dead, and I was also picking up some Return of the Living Dead movies at the time, and sure enough, I came across that DVD. Me thinking it was just a colorized version of the movie at first, I brought it home thinking, oh, this would be cool. That's when I realized, oh my god, this is a remake of Night of the Living Dead. I had no idea. So I watched that movie, fell in love with it, and seeing Tony Todd in the movie was just amazing. This movie does a few things differently. For one, the character of Barbara turns into more of like a Ripley character from Aliens, a badass, a fighter, as to where in the original Barbara becomes just overdriven with fear. Both performances are great. They're just different. And that's where I think Night of the Living Dead 1990 succeeds by keeping the heart and soul of what the movie is about, but changing some elements in just different directions, and not necessarily bad different directions. So I have that DVD till this very day. I've put a ton of miles on that DVD. Then years and years went by, and I was wondering if the movie ever came out on Blu-ray. Well, some things were going on behind the scenes that I wasn't aware of, but we'll get to that in just a minute. So years went by, and maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, I finally went online and saw this. Night of the Living Dead 1990 on Blu-ray. Now, when I watched this release, I loved it dearly. I thought the picture quality was really good on this. It was crisp, it was clear, there was nothing for me to complain about, and I love the fact that they have the special features on here that show the making of for Night of the Living Dead, that vintage EPK, which is known as an electronic press kit. Talks all about the making of the film and how Tom Savini, did all his things he had to do for it. You learn a lot. It's very rewatchable too, which I think is important. But I also remembered this at the time. A buddy of mine named Pizzal, who you probably know, reviewed this movie on Blu-ray, yet his came from a different company that I wasn't ready to start buying movies from yet. I since have become a huge fan of them, but I'm talking about Night of the Living Dead's Umbrella Blu-ray release for the movie. Now, at that point, I don't even think I had owned this release yet, but I thought, well, I don't have a region-free player or anything like that, so I guess I'll pass. This is the same movie, but as you can see, you can reverse the artwork on that and have some really cool art. This is another great release, so either one of these are totally fine. There's nothing wrong with either the American Sony Blu-ray or the Umbrella Blu-ray release. Both are fantastic. But, like I said earlier, there was things going on behind the scenes in physical media that I just wasn't keen to yet. Now, I did a video with a friend of mine named Garrett, and we talked all about this company called Twilight Time. Now, Twilight Time was technically a boutique Blu-ray company, but I wouldn't even really want to use that word, because in terms of special features for their releases, they were very little to sometimes none. But they were a company putting movies out on Blu-ray releases and having very limited quantities of it, giving the illusion or the feeling of some sort of a boutique company. Now, these releases were coming out in the early 2010s. Now, I knew about a few of these releases. One of the more notable ones I remembered hearing about from years passing was the title of Fright Night. Now, Fright Night as well has a really good Sony Blu-ray release along with a new 4K Steelbook that you can't go wrong either way. But that Blu-ray release was very sought after. It has a very distinct look with that Twilight Time logo on it. But there were some other releases that came out during that time. Now, during this video I did with my friend Garrett, he showed me a release for Night of the Living Dead that I had heard about once or twice but completely left my mind. The release is this one right here. This is the Twilight Time release of Night of the Living Dead 1990. Now, as you'll see, there's a very distinct different look. You can't confuse these two Blu-rays. This is the one you'd probably see readily available online, and this is the one that you would probably pay a little bit more money for. Now, why is this worth some money? Well, number one, because it is long out of print, and number two, it's because it's a very interestingly bad release. Now, I started looking up reviews of this release after hearing what things were said about this, and obviously I then went on to watch this release, and my jaw was pretty close to being on the floor. So what is so bad about this Twilight Time Blu-ray release of Night of the Living Dead 1990, you might ask? Maybe you're thinking the picture quality's not that good, or maybe the audio is pretty poor. No, what they did was completely change the color timing on this release compared to the DVD release of prior days. Now, if you watch this release, it'll look just like the DVD except much higher quality. But if you watch this release, they put this cheap nighttime filter look over the entire film. Here's a shot outside of Tony Todd when he's approaching the house that's going to be where the majority of the film takes place. That is an image that you would see from either the Blu-ray or DVD. Now let's look at an image from that exact same scene that would be on the Night of the Living Dead Twilight Time Blu-ray. As you can see, the entire film looks like there's a huge cloud over the sun. No one can be fooled looking at that scene thinking it's actually nighttime. It's just horribly changed in its color timing. But I will be a little bit fair on this. Obviously, Night of the Living Dead 1990 doesn't all take place during the day. As a matter of fact, a lot of the film, if not the majority of the film, does take place during the nighttime. There's one scene where this really skinny, creepy-looking zombie comes up through the window. Here's an image of that zombie in the Blu-ray and or DVD release of Night of the Living Dead. And here's an actual image of that same zombie shot from the Twilight Time Night of the Living Dead release. As you can see, that doesn't look as bad because it is in fact a nighttime scene, so the color timing is a little bit more subdued and a little bit more bluey on this. But the fact is, this is just a ridiculous look for this movie. There was absolutely nothing wrong with the way the movie was color timed and looked originally, as on the Blu-ray release and the DVD release was. Now, the story goes when this Blu-ray was coming out, people were trying to return this thing and send it back. There was a lot of upset people over this release. One thing that's a mystery is who was in charge of changing the color time of this release. That's something I haven't been able to figure out. I can't imagine that John Russo or George Romero or even Tom Savini would have wanted to do this to the film, because it's not like they did a black and white version of Night of the Living Dead 1990. That's something I could have gotten behind if there was an alternative release for this movie where it was put in black and white. But this was just color time to make the whole movie look like it was taking place during the nighttime scenes, especially in the beginning of the movie where it's clearly in the morning and afternoon. When we see Barbara in the beginning of the movie in the cemetery, it is clearly like 1 in the afternoon on the Blu-ray release and the DVD release, and like it is in the film. But on here, they tried to pass it off as nighttime, and it just makes you roll your eyes and just smack yourself on the forehead. So this is one of those anomalies in the world of horror physical media, and clearly one of the most hated horror Blu-ray releases of all time. Thankfully, this has not become a thing that is done too terribly often, and a lot of rules are written in blood in things like this. What do I mean by that? Well, when something like this happens and there's a lot of backlash, it kind of deters other companies from doing something like this down the road. Thankfully, a great viewer of the channel sent me this Blu-ray release, as it is somewhat of a collector's item now because of its extremely ridiculous nature of changing its color time. For right or wrong, it's a piece of horror physical media history. Now, I've heard that sometimes this version of the movie will pop up on streaming sites to watch, but at the time of making this video, I wasn't able to track down the Twilight Time color timing of this film on a streaming service. But if you're ever able to find either this Blu-ray or a stream of the Twilight Time Night of the Living Dead 1990 Blu-ray, I say do it just so you can experience it and see it for yourself. So if you are into these sorts of things, look into it, and if you're a big Night of the Living Dead collector, I would file this Twilight Time remake Blu-ray right next to that Anchor Bay Deluxe DVD release with the added scenes that John Russo added in. So when it comes to controversial and hated horror movie releases, that makes 2 Living Dead releases that are in that pile. That Anchor Bay release and the Twilight Time, that Night of the Living Dead 1990 Blu-ray release. Let me know if you bought this back in the day and your thoughts on this release. Did you hate this like most people? Did you try to send it back? Somebody out there had to probably like that version though. Is it you? Anyway, guys, thanks for watching this video, and thanks for going down memory lane with me on the world of horror physical media. There's a lot of crazy tales out there, and I'm going to try to tell them all. For now, this is CHH, and we'll see you guys next time. Stay scary.
Huge giant thank you to all of my Patreon supporters. Without you guys, this would not be possible. To get behind the scenes photos, videos, music, private live streams, and much more, you can subscribe to my Patreon for as little as $1 a month. Thank you to my patrons.